welcome to our first reading of the day. Last night I sat down and I wrote a very nice introduction for Terrance, and then I purposely left it at home because I kind of wanted to speak off the cuff here. I first met Terrance in 2001 when I was a student at Carnegie Mellon, and I've been familiar with his work, but when the Fiction and Poetry Festival Committee met around this time last year and we started talking about poets, I said, Terrance Hayes. I want Terrance Hayes. And the reason I said that is, one, I love his work, but as an MFA student, I actually got to hear him read at West Virginia University. And after I shut the girls up around me who were going, is he married? And I was like, yes, and he has kids, leave him alone. I was able to sit forward and just listen to his work, and I even emailed him before he came here and said, I still remember this poem that you read at WVU, and I would love to hear it again, because the way he reads brings his poems to life, and there is no way around it. If you hear him read, it is a whole new experience from reading his books, and I am honored to introduce Terrance Hayes today.
All right, I won't keep you too long. It's great to be here. It's been a wonderful festival. I feel like it'll be around for a long time. I guess this is the second one that you guys have done. There's really not that much going on in the state. So you have to feel like if you advertise and let people know, I feel like you can fill this place up and make this a great literary event. So I hope you'll keep it up. It was great this year. You were very warm. So you know what I was really thinking was about how powerful children are. I think kids probably don't know it when they're young, the sort of power that they have, so that they can just change a room, whether it's one or a group of kids that come in, and suddenly all of the energy goes towards you, and we feel like we're speaking to you. So that's something about your power and people's hope for you going out and changing the world. So I felt like that too. And I had to take a bunch of my poems off the deck that have bad words in them. And Ken, every time Ken has introduced me, Ken Autry, he has said, what do you say, Ken? First you said erotic, and then you said sexual. His poems are very sexual. And I thought, well, not all of them. So obviously if I said I like Lolita, you know. So anyway, so I actually don't read very much from Muscular Music these days, but it's here, so I thought I should read from it. And I feel like this poem, the poems in this collection I wrote sort of before I thought that I would ever be a poet. I think you guys all know my story. I was in a basketball scholarship. I kind of wrote on my own. I majored in painting, and then I wound up in graduate school because they were paying for it, because it was free. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gone. And I wrote mostly kind of what I was interested in all the way through, so that, for example, a poem, you know, one of my earlier experiences was kind of the subject matter that other people were writing about, and I thought, what do I know? What do I know? And maybe this dates me from most people, but I knew Fred Sanford. So I thought, this is one of the earlier poems I wrote in graduate school, What I Am. Fred Sanford's on at 12, and I'm standing in the express lane, cash only, about to buy Head and Shoulders, the white people shampoo. No one knows what I am. My name could be Lamont. George Clinton wears colors like Toucan Sam, the Fruit Loop Pelican. Follow your nose, he says, but I have no nose, no mouth, so you tell me what's good, what's God, what's funky. When I stop by McDonald's for a cheeseburger, no one suspects what I am. I smile at Ronald's poster, perpetual grin behind the pissed off fly girl cashier I love. Where are my fries? Ain't I American? I never say niggers in my poems. My ancestors didn't immigrate. Why would anyone think of leaving their native land? I'm thinking about shooting some hoop later on. I'll dunk on every one of those niggas. They have no idea what I am. I might be the next Jordan God. They don't know if Toni Morrison is a woman or a man. Michael Jackson is the biggest name in showbiz. Mama say, mama kusa, mama say, mama kusa, sang the Bushmen in Africa. I'll buy a dime bag after the game, me and Jody. He says, to hell with them white people at work, man. He was an all-American guard in high school. He's so cool, but he don't know what I am. Fred Sanford's own in a few, and I got the dandruff-free head and shoulders of white people and a cheeseburger belly and a Thriller CD and Nike high top and slavery's dead and the TV's my daddy. You big dummy, Fred tells Lamont. So that was my way of saying, well, these, I guess, would be my sources, the things that I write about. I'll just read a few poems from this book again. I think if I just track through the 3 books, reading a few poems and then winding up with some stuff, maybe you'll get a sense of kind of where I'm going, where I've been. The other thing that happened for me, going from South Carolina, going from Hartsville right down the street, up to Pittsburgh, is that I found, even though Pittsburgh is by no means New York, there were other things happening. There were rappers and there were basketball players and there was spoken word. And I found myself often going into those communities in addition to spending time in the university and in the libraries. So one of the things that would happen is when I went out with these rappers, I always had my paper. So I would get up on the stage of the spoken words and I would read. And they would say, nah, man, you can't, you gotta memorize it, you gotta memorize it. And I would say, and I think this is one of the distinctions between spoken word and what's on the page, is that I would say, I want people to know that the paper is there. I prefer the paper. Sometimes it's like a barrier, but it also is to say, well, I'm reading something. I'm not necessarily reciting something. Nonetheless, I did respond to him, and so this would be as close as I came to a sort of poem that had a kind of the feeling of the flow that I think many of the people I admired in the community had. So it's called Ballad of Bullethead. I was born in metal, my mother's kettle. My father peddled, so we settled alone. Metal child and mother of stone, another story of moans, bank loans, shut off telephones, through spring and winter storms, and my body of arms carry charms of speech. Tires screech, preachers preach, the world is full of harms, the man you couldn't reach, mud hunger to eat. Oh, say can you see, street corner to street, pantomime of feet, but I'll beat Uncle Sam and I won't give a dime or a damn, and my willows won't weep, though the dead are asleep, and my mother's a pillow of grief. Bullethead is who I be. Oh, say can you see, words sounding absurd, but I gotta get heard on corner, on curb, car garage, backyard, lyric fusillade, sentence propensity, this word world intensity, past tense, 10 pence, whatever makes sense, because I can't pay the rent, pennies spent in my pockets, pennies bent in my fist, and my body's a mist, and my body's a smog. What I mean is, my body's the dark, and my tongue is a spark, and the light will dismiss me because my words make it woozy, and their anger has bruised me, but my mouth screaming choose me, and my heart is a boy who's dizzy. So that was as close as I could come to what they were doing. Maybe I'll do 2 more from this book. Now this is a series that I have really never read from, but it's inspired by a young boy in Chicago, Robert Sandifer, and I came across the story. I don't even know if I have a capacity for this sort of thing anymore, but I came across the story, and it was essentially about him getting in a gang, committing some acts of violence. I think he killed a young girl, and then he got away, and then the other gang members found him, and they killed him. And this all happened, Sandifer was 11, and then the girl he killed was 14, and then the other gang members that found him and killed him were 15 and 16. So I wrote a series of poems in response to that. And again, just because of my kind of shock at it in some ways. Although now that I'm older, I feel like if I came across that story, I would just say, not again. But then it felt new and it felt disappointing. So I wrote several poems about it. And I guess I'll just read one because this poem has behind it Langston Hughes' poem, A Dream Deferred, from a series of poems. The dream montage that he wrote. So it's speaking to him, but it's also sort of speaking to the boy, whose nickname was Yummy. So the quote is, Yummy spent his last 3 days of life on the run. Sun out like a floodlight, does it burn? Watch on your wrist like a cuff, does it run? You stole your sneakers and a fist full of sweets. Here come the death rush, hit the road. Slip into the alley like a burning bush. What happens when a dream explodes? Does it hush? I'll read one more. Okay. So the other thing, again, that has kind of continued through the poems would be an interest in jazz and jazz icons and jazz figures. So I have a poem here that again are sort of, when I think about where my poems come from, they often start with a sort of surprise at a bit of an image or a bit of news or a response to something, and then I try to work my way, I think, back to a sort of surprise, even though it's crafted now in the language. So this poem came out of a story that I heard about Miles Davis and his relationships to women. Cicely Tyson, he was abusive, essentially. Cicely Tyson was well known for, the kind of tumultuousness of their relationship. But there was another woman who was a kind of a funk singer. Her name was Betty Davis is her name now. I can't remember what her name was before. I don't know if anybody knows who she is. Betty is my name. She wrote 2 CDs out. She used to open for Parliament Funkadelic. Anyway, she was from Pittsburgh. So I found out about her, and through her, I started thinking about Miles Davis's relationship to women. So she's not in the poem, but that's sort of a framework for it. And the poem is called When the Neighbors Fight. When the neighbors fight, the trumpet's mouth is apology. We sit listening to Kind of Blue. Miles Davis beat his wife. It hurts to know the music is better than him. The wall is damaged skin. Tears can purify the heart. Even the soft kiss can bite. Miles Davis beat his wife. It's muffled in the jazz, the struggle with good and bad. The wall is damaged skin. The horn knows a serious fear. Your tongue burns, pushing into my ear. Miles Davis beat his wife. No one called the cops until the music stopped. The heart is a mute horn. The horn is a bleeding wife. Our neighbors are a score of danger. You open my shirt like doors you want to enter. I am tender as regret. Your mouth on the nipple above my heart, there is the good pain of your bite. All right, so those are poems from that initial collection. So part of what happened for me was, in kind of moving into a new space and discovering that I was something like a poet, I wrote what I would consider fairly regular poems, although maybe you don't think those are regular poems. They tell stories, they're pretty clear. But then I realized that, I'm actually a sort of, I walk through the world with a sort of slant. My sense of the world is sort of slanted. So I thought, well, how do I get that kind of weirdness into the poems? And that's at the root of what Hip Logic is about. It's sort of about like a kind of intuitive sense, intuitive relationship to the world and to language. And so I wrote a series of poems which are based on a sort of word game that I won't go into now. But you'll see just based on what they're doing, how strange they are. So, but what I will say about the word game is that the poems all came out of newspaper puzzles. So there's this kind of anagram word game where they give you the word like segregate, which is really one of the words, and then you figure out how many words you can make out of the word segregate. They all have to have 4 letters. Does this sound familiar to you? I don't know if it's in the Florence or the State. Do we still have the State newspaper? So, but it was in a few newspapers, and I found myself being slightly obsessive, playing it all the time. I stopped even, writing poems. I would just be trying to do these games. And then inevitably, I thought I had to figure out some other way to make this useful. And I'm going to start with segregate, because when that word came down, I thought, gates in it, and rage, and tear. I said, I got to use this word. And then I turned to my wife and said, and I can now write a poem about race. And she was like, all your poems are about race. So I thought I was giving myself some sort of permission. So again, this will give you a sense of what happened when I thought, okay, if the poem just has to be about the word, and I'll let my mind just do what it wants to do in relationship to a given word. Segregate. On the first morning of school, there is a young tree frog waiting patiently at the front gate. Since this means there will be no classes for the rest of the day, the children dump their school gear in their lockers and hustle to the windows to stare. The girls are eager to transform him with a kiss. The boys eager to see him on the basketball court. But their principal greets him with a "get the hell out of here." A security guard fetches the tear gas. Some of the older teachers crowd in the doorway like befuddled geese. You belong in our swamps, not our schools, they rage. But clearly, the cool-blooded amphibian American does not agree. Let's see here. Another one. So this one was a difficult one. The word was bowling. And so I was thinking out what are the words in bowling that I can use in the poem, but I just couldn't really think of a subject matter, even though when I was young, we would go bowling all the time. And I never was great at it. but I was trying to figure out, well, what kind of poem, and it's a poem about bowling. So I decided that I would have the poem be in the voice of a housewife whose husband goes out bowling all the time. I'm gonna read it like a housewife, but you could just imagine me as a housewife. Bowling. He got home late and lingered in the kitchen, and when I heard his wingtips shuffling down the hall, I imagined a lion entering the bedroom. I lit a candle and began to glow. I was in the same fire pink gown I wore on our wedding night, the one I won playing bingo. I said, let's not talk about those glib pins at the edge of a lane, and stretched as his long fold-out fingers approached. But when he asked me to blow on his chicken noodle soup to cool it down, my sweat began to boil. Yes, I threw the soup on him, Your Honor, then I threw the bowl. So I felt like, writing those poems, I started moving closer to the sorts of poems I think about. And so, again, one of the things that has kind of remained, even in these poems, was a sort of an interest in the icons from my childhood, the figures that I was drawn to. And so Mr. T was one of them. So I have a poem in here called Mr. T. And y'all remember Mr. T? Is Mr. T still around? The 18? That must come on old reruns or something. And I'm referencing some stuff from the 18, not from Rocky 3. Mr. T. A man made of scrap muscle and the steam engine's imagination. White feathers flapping in each lobe for the skull's migration should the need arise. Sometimes drugged and duffled by white men in a cockpit bound for the next adventure. And liable to crush a fool's face like newsprint. Headlines of Hollywood blood and wincing. Half Stephen Fetchit, half John Henry. What were we, the skinny b-boys, to learn from him? How to hulk through Chicago in a hedgerow afro, an ox grunt kicking dust behind the teeth. Those 18 glamoring gold chains around the throat of pity. That fat, hollow medallion like the sun on a leash. Let me see here. So I thought at some point y'all would get tired of clapping between every poem. You really don't have to do that. I don't expect it. So hold your applause to the end. It does make me feel good, but you don't have to do it. Again, and so I would also say, I think I've talked earlier, and I'll say it again, like for me, the thing that I get most excited about, or the thing that I'm most eager to talk about, would never be my own work. It would be the work of other people, whether it's artists or musicians, and definitely writers. It's just, there's so much more to talk about than to talk. If we talk about me, the conversation will end very quickly. So in my work, I think this is reflected because I often will write about people that I admire, people that I think about. I had a poem when you were talking about Baldwin. I was thinking about Baldwin and another country, and Etheridge Knight, this other poet who has a poem that references that novel. So of course I didn't bring any of that stuff. But I thought I'd read this one. This is for Paul Robeson, who somehow, people come in and out of fashion. And I was actually talking about this with James Dickey, who is, one of the few poets that are actually associated with South Carolina. But somehow I think, lately I think people have kind of gotten more interested in James Dickey again. He was the first poet I'd ever heard of because he was in Columbia at USC when I was growing up. Otherwise, I didn't know what poetry was or what a poet could be. But what I was really talking about was how icons or figures sort of come in and out. We have to reacquaint ourselves with them, especially because we're so busy and we're often being kind of bombarded with new figures. So I was watching something, I saw it online, and it was a question about, can Beyonce end the war on terror or something like that was the question. And it was something about people in Iraq and people all around the world and Afghanistan loving Beyonce. And I thought, when did Beyonce become Diana Ross? That kind of idea of, well, now she's an icon, but she slipped past. My daughter likes her, so I guess she is an icon. So anyway, okay, I'm on a tangent. For Paul Robeson, and this is a quote from one of the musicals he was in. I could go on and on about Paul Robeson. If you look him up, he was pretty much a superhero in terms of his athletic prowess, his ability to sing, his political sense of the world, everything. I mean, superhero. But this is related to the musicals he did. So this quote comes from Showboat. Old Man River, he don't say nothing. He must know something. sings. He said, Old Man River, something like that. That's how he sings. I can't get as deep as Paul Robeson. They have never heard a voice deeper than mud at the bottom of a bottomless creek. They have never heard gospel or the blood's spirit speak. They have never heard a storm come down and break the river free. They have never seen the river break free. They have never seen a stone turn the temple to meat. They have never seen a mother in flames or a funeral wreath. They have never seen a black man weep. Dear Paul, they come each night to the opera house seats. They have never heard a voice so deep. They have never heard the sound when a river breaks free. And then this other poem, again, I'll just read a few from this too, and then we'll kind of end up with newer stuff and stuff from the most recent book. This too, this poem is just for Robert Hayden, another African-American artist of the last century. I feel like these guys are, they wouldn't be of my generation and probably wouldn't be people that I would be interested in, but somehow, when you go out on your own, especially with the internet, the way people used to just kind of wander the aisles of the library and find things, or the bookstore. So, what you find is that the difference in generation really kind of falls away very quickly because some of the issues and the themes always remain. So issues around relationships to parents, relationships to work, your social obligations, et cetera, et cetera. So Robert Hayden, in his life, dealt with a lot of those issues because he kind of wrote in a period of the civil rights era. And so some of the younger poets like Amiri Baraka and Sonia Sanchez, when they looked at him, they kind of thought he wasn't bringing it hard enough. He wasn't political enough. And he was told he wrote poems, and this poem is partly in response to one of those poems, a poem like Those Winter Sundays, which is essentially about his father. It's like, Sundays too, my father got up early, and then with cracked hands, made banked fires blaze. No one ever thanked him. I would lie here in the cold, splintering and breaking, and when the rooms were warm, rise, fearing the chronic angers of that house, speaking indifferently to him who had driven out the cold and polished my good shoes as well. What did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? So what you find in that 14-line poem is that there's no point where he says, I am a black man, this is my experience, my father is a black man, trying to take care of his family, preparing me for church. And yet, it's still a very powerful poem. It's one of the most powerful poems I've ever read. And I think, on some level, it speaks to the kind of humanity that's at the heart of being black and everything else. So, but other poets were not that interested in what he was doing in the civil rights era. So they found that sort of problematic, that he wouldn't announce himself as black and make his kind of, his racial pride be more overt and more explicit in the poem. So that's what he dealt with through a lot of his life. And he wasn't like a real handsome guy. His glasses were like that thick. And meanwhile, all the black arts poets were pretty good looking guys. They had on dashikis and afros with picks in them and all that kind of stuff. So there was a lot of things for him to be kind of hurt by this sort of attack by these younger poets. So at the heart of this sort of poem is looking at him and thinking about the different ways that we can be black, or the different ways that we can be human, and what it means to be on a certain team, or what it means to be on no one's team. For Robert Hayden, did your father come home after fighting through the week at work? Did the sweat change to salt in his ears? Was the bitter white grain the only music he'd hear? Is this why you were quiet when other poets sang of the black man's beauty? Is this why you choked on the tonsil of Negro duty? Were there as many offices for pain as love? Should a black man never be shy? Was your father a mountain 20 shovels couldn't bury? Was he a train leaving a lone column of smoke? Was he a black magnolia singing at your feet? Was he a blackjack smashed against your throat? All right, so that's all I read from Hip Logic. I'll read a few things from the most recent book, Wind in a Box, and I feel like the poems get stranger and stranger, so it's gonna be hard for me to find something reasonable for y'all. Let me see, there must be something reasonable in here. Well, so I have a series of poems in voices, and the voices, again, of people that I'm interested in. It just kind of transitioned from writing about them for Robert Hayden, sort of trying to be, to embody some of the things that they represented. I'll read this poem because this poem goes back to the idea of like my interest in hip hop and rap and language. but also the sort of kind of peculiar people within any given art form. So that this poet, this rapper, Kool Keith, is someone, most people don't even know who he is. A few people know who Kool Keith is. He's been around, he's very peculiar. He actually has some kind of like a butt fetish. He likes to rap about butts for some reason. Everybody's butts. Like when he raps about the people who he's gonna beat up, he raps about their butts. So, I don't know. I think he's actually been locked up in an insane asylum a few times. This is true, I saw him. I was like reading at Yale, and someone said, oh, Kool Keith is in town. And I went and saw him. Anyway, so this is in the voice of Kool Keith. Yo, you soft as the flesh beneath my thumbnails. That's why I cut you. I'm that third rail, that live wire. Yeah, I'm that PI for hire, that dark age surf-made spire. You need to say your prayers. You need to believe your naysayers. Those parachute pants you wear are baffling. There's hot air in your bread basket, you penny loafer. I got a chauffeur. I'm laughing. You're a tour bus behind my limousine. Boy, you can't pass it. I'm too cool. I freeze the wannabes, I melt the moon, I hand my butler my top hat, I tease my afro with my afro pick, my head is on right. I'm fur-collared, cashmere, double-down, diamond button trench coat. You Goodwill jacket. You anti-hazardous. You crack to my angel dust. Better run before you get your butt kicked, you plastic spastic, you manic matchstick. I'm hot like that sunlight and classic rock. I'm that black Elvis, that black Bach. I'm too cool. I grind my pelvis, my back crack, your mama back crack too. I give her love bites. I'm daddy to you. Brush your teeth, empty your bladder before you greet me. That fat girl call you honey, all her kids call you daddy, the bastards. You have my sympathy, but you can't have my money. Don't write no symphonies or rap songs about me. Your style is lousy. Yeah, boy, I'm too cool. Don't talk about me. So, these poems are all over the place too. So I'll read one that, will make sense to you guys. Again, I can't do the voice, but another person that interested me or interested and still interests me would be Strom Thurmond. So this poem is called The Blue Strom. I would like to do it in that voice. What is that voice? It's almost like Ross Perot and Elmer Fudd. What would you describe Strom Thurmond's voice? Just imagine me as Strom Thurmond. Never let the ink of biographers touch you. But if it happens, learn what you can of their witchcraft. It will be useful should you ever find yourself without linen. I would never have risen above backwood, bow-tied superintendent or circuit judge had I not studied the alchemy of metaphor. There may be 24 gaps in a given sentence. Never mistake silence for death or obedience. Just because an anthem can't be heard over the bluegrass of lawn parties and amphitheaters doesn't mean it can't be sung. If you stand on the porch of the State House on a Sunday, you will hear the great flag of the Confederacy. On some occasions, you may have to lower an earlobe to the tongue, whipping in the mouth of the one Negro servant who remains when everything else is burned. Avoid anyone, even your secretary, who talks openly about revenge. Master the filibuster, for it will wear out the centuries of heaven. Cultivate horticulture. Marry after 40. Outlaw basketball. Outlaw school buses, outlaw the manufacturing of transistors, outlaw jive talk and rhythm. If you intend to be reelected, certain moods must be abolished. It goes without saying. Remember your duty. If you must apologize, let it be in a language no one comprehends. So, I would say, you don't have to know that much about Strom Thurmond just to kind of like move on through the poem. But, a lot of the stuff that I'm always interested in, or the kind of way that I build around these poems, has to do very much with people's sort of biography, their own obsessions, and kind of like putting that into the poem. So all the stuff about marrying after 40, or, mastering the filibuster, and certain other sorts of details about his life kind of overlap with my own imagination, I guess, and my own sense of what he's doing. Okay, just a few more. Oh, I'll read another one. Maybe I'll just read these blue poems from Winning the Box today. So having kids, inevitably, even the things that they're interested in starts to kind of appear in the poems. So I did a blue poem, and this one is just in the voice of Dr. Seuss. And I was just, it's being Dr. Seuss being me, which is to say, he's thinking about black people, but he's also being Dr. Seuss. So it's called The Blue Seuss. Blacks in one box, blacks in two boxes, blacks on blacks, stacked in boxes, stacked on boxes, blacks in boxes stacked on shores. Blacks in boxes stacked on boats in darkness. Blacks in boxes do not float. Blacks in boxes count their losses. Blacks on boat docks, blacks on auction, blacks on wagons, blacks with masters in the houses, blacks with bosses in the fields, blacks in helmets toting rifles, blacks in Harlem toting banjos, boots, and quilts, blacks on foot, blacks on buses, blacks on backwood, hardwood stages singing blues, blacks on Broadway singing too. Blacks can Charleston, blacks can foxtrot, blacks can bebop, blacks can moonwalk, blacks can beatbox, blacks can run fast too. Blacks on blacks and blacks on knees and blacks on couches, blacks on good times, blacks on roots, blacks on Cosby. Blacks in voting booths are blacks in boxes. Blacks beside blacks in rows of houses are blacks in boxes too. Let's see here. Maybe, what else should I read from this thing? Well, I mean, I guess I am reading, I should read, one or two, I guess, serious poems for you guys so that you know it's not all fun and games. This is a poem. I have a cousin in Columbia, Purvis. So Purvis, you wouldn't think that he would be a person who would be interested in books just based on his demeanor. He's tough and he walks through the town, he talks smack and all that kind of stuff. He's always talking trash. But he does read, and so he reads my books and he reads other people's books. And so at one point he said to me, because he still is, he's still Purvis, he was like, man, you need to write a poem for me. And I said, all right, okay. So I wrote this poem for him after his father passed away a few years ago. But I didn't tell him about the poem, and you'll see. So this poem is called The Whale for Purvis. Just like that, your father's dead. Half of all the footsteps you've made in your lifetime swept away by the tide, gnawing the shore. The bits of shells like fragments of bone and teeth sinking into the sand beneath you as you walk toward the people crowding the body of a young whale. A boy on the shoulders of his father, a woman slipping film into a camera, the skin peeling on a lifeguard's neck. As he stoops peering into the animal's eye, saying nothing, the audience silent or silenced by the sound of salt water sweet-talking the shore, as if sweet-talking the earth from her prom dress, the tide stroking its hand along her inner thigh and finding the crop of razor bumps like the humped tiny back of shells, and smiling at the thought of the girl preparing for her prom date, the hair lathered and shaved away, the air leaving ripples inside the dress as the knee-high hem is lifted above the girl's waist and breasts, the sound of the silk passing over her body, like the sound of the tide uncovering and then covering the hard news of the day, the news returning each time it's washed away. So for me, I was responding to, something about grief and loss, but I knew it was going to be not anything that, Purvis was thinking about something like a poem that says, my cousin Purvis is great, he's muscular and handsome, all the ladies love him, that kind of thing. He's got a big truck, all that stuff. So when I gave him the book, I just didn't even mention the poem. And then, a couple of months later, in fact, he called me and was like, hey man, I read that poem, The Whale, man, give me a call. So I didn't call him back. It's like, what am I gonna say to him? I can't explain it to him. All right, so we're gonna wind up, I guess I'll wind up with a few newer poems. Let's see here. Maybe just two of them. See what I got up here. I just never know what we're gonna do. Yeah, I guess that's good. We'll wind up with just these two newer poems. So this one, I think it's about Katrina. It's called Fish Head for Katrina. It takes time sometimes to respond to sort of national events. And what I find is that people always call certain sorts of people when things happen, and poets are always at the top of that list. That's the only time you hear from people when something happens, right? So they're like, a parent died, there was a hurricane, there was a bomb, something like that. Can you write a poem? And I'm always like, well, yeah, you give me a couple of years to write it. So this is recent, and so it was interesting because I had turned down all these other kinds of requests for poems about Katrina. And then ultimately, I thought what I wrote was probably not even explicit enough if we go back to that idea of sort of the explicitness of a subject versus the kind of metaphorical relationship to subjects. So anyway, so I think it's about Katrina. Fish Head for Katrina. The mouth is where the dead who are not dead do not dream. a house of damaged translations, married to distraction, as in a bucket left in a storm, a choir singing in the rain like fish acquiring air underwater. Prayer and sin the body performs to know it is alive, lit from the inside by reckoning, as in a city which is no longer a city. The tongue reaching down a tunnel and the teeth wet as windows set along a freeway, where the dead live in the noise of their shotgun houses. They drift from their wards like fish spreading thin as a song diminished by its own opening. Split by faith and soaked in it, the mouth is a flooded machine. Okay, and then this last poem, The Avocado. I guess I don't need to set it up very much. There's, when you live in a place long enough, there's all sorts of kinds of stories. So this is partly a response to this story about the 70s when a band of, actually it was Sonia Sanchez and Etheridge Knight, a bunch of other poets, kind of went into the university system. I guess I should say this. They went into the university system and demanded that their subjects be taught. And it happened in universities all across the campus. And the result of it was the Black Studies programs and African American Studies programs that emerged in the 70s, sort of after the Civil Rights. So this is about kind of one moment where a band of students went into the University of Pittsburgh in 1971 and said, you're going to teach our stuff. And then it happened. The interesting thing about that is, I've heard that story like a million times from everybody that was there. Some people who weren't there, but suddenly they're there when they tell the story. So it's just, essentially the frame of the poem is hearing the story once again. The Avocado. In 1971, drunk on the sweet, sweet juice of revolution, a crew of us marched into the president's office with a list of demands, the black man tells us at the February luncheon. And I'm pretending I haven't heard this one before, as I eye black tortillas on a red plate beside a big green bowl of guacamole made from the whipped, battered remains of several harmless former avocados. If abolitionists had a flag, it would no doubt feature the avocado, also known as the alligator pear for obvious reasons. Number one, reparations. Enough gold to fill each of our women's wombs, gold to nurse our warriors waiting to enter this world with bright fists. That's what we told him, the brother man says. And I am thinking of the money-colored flesh of the avocado. High in monosaturates, its oil content is second only to olives. I'm looking at my wife's caterpillar locks dangle over her ear. I dare you to find a lovelier black woman from Cincinnati, where the North touches the South. 3, we wanted more boulevards named for the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., an airport named for Sojourner Truth. The roots of the avocado tree can raise pavement, so it's not too crazy to imagine the fruit as a symbol of revolt on the abolitionist flag. We are all one kind of abolitionist or another, no doubt. And we are like the avocado, too, with its inedible ruby-colored seed that can actually sprout from the inside when the fruit is overmature, causing internal molds and breakdown. Demand number 21, a Harriet Tubman statue on the mall. Brother man is weeping now and walking wet tissue to the trash can, and he is saying, Harriet Tubman was a walking shadow, or Harriet Tubman walked in shadows, or to many, Harriet Tubman was a shadow to walk in. And the meaning is pureed flesh with lime juice, minced garlic, and chili powder. It is salt and the pepper Harriet Tubman tossed over her shoulder to trouble the bloodhounds. Many isolated avocado trees fail to fruit from lack of pollination. Damn, ain't you hungry? I whispered to my wife, and she puts a finger to my lips to distract me. Say, baby, wasn't that you waking me up last night to say you'd had a dream where I was a big, luscious, man-sized avocado? That's true. That's actually where the poem comes from. She had the dream, and I said, I'm going to write a poem about that. Someone's belly is growling. We weren't going to be colored. We weren't going to be Negro, the man says. And I'm thinking, every time I hear this story, it's the one telling the story that's the hero. Hush now, Harriet Tubman probably said near dawn, pointing a finger black enough to be her pistol barrel toward the future, or pointing a pistol barrel black enough to be her finger at the mouth of some starved, stammering slave, and then lifting her head to listen for something that no one but her could hear. Thank you. You guys have been great.